My name is Philipp Kruse. I'm attorney at law with my practice law firm in Zurich. Today is Saturday, 28th May 2022, and it is the closing day of the World Health Assembly 75th session. What us all brings together is our shared experience that during the 2.5 past years, we have seen our governments calling for more powers for emergency law purposes. We have seen in our cases that we presented for our clients that our courts, regional and high courts, did not respect the Constitution, did not perform their constitutional duties in terms of independent examination of the legally relevant facts. Our national courts refused to do this constitutional duty. And the reason we were always given was we live in a pandemic. We all share the experience that also our national parliaments refused to perform an act of supervision of our governments. In particular here in Switzerland, where we wrote multiple letters on behalf of the Swiss Lawyers Committee to urge the members of parliament to initiate a process of reinvestigation. Do we really have still a threat for public health? We were given the response, no, we can't do an investigation as long as the status of public health emergency of international concern is still going on. And we could continue our list of joint experience in these terms. The reason, so, why the constitutional order in our countries has been deactivated to such a high degree and associated with it, why we have seen so much harm for society, for public health, for businesses, is just one reason and one point, and that is the fact that WHO reserves the sole right to determine, to declare, and to extend the pandemic under the title of Public Health Emergency of International Concern. There are just a few people who are competent, who are doing these declarations. And now, during the past 10 days, this organization has held its World Health Assembly and has discussed, instead of looking back and doing a proper quality control and review their own methods, as it would be normal for every businessman to do, and as it would not be normal as well in public authorities' business. Instead of doing so, they decided we need more powers, we need more funding, we need stronger structures. And this is why we are here. This is what brought many lawyers from different countries together. We have to address this topic as we are about to address and to see an emergency for our democracies, an emergency for our constitutions. So it is a privilege to introduce you here to my right to Catherine Austin Fitz from the United States. She is the publisher of the Solari report. Very welcome, Catherine. Thank you for coming, doing this long way. Then to my left, I have from France, the attorney at law with her own practice in Paris, Diane Prota. Sois la bienvenue.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
C'est superbe que tu es ici. Et puis maintenant, also on my left side, from Austria, Dr. Georg Prochlik with his law firm in Vienna. Welcome here to Geneva. Great that you are here. So, and now with us as well, we have many other lawyers and many other experts around the globe who are with us on the screen via Zoom, and they are being introduced by Polly. Polly is the head of CHD TV. Please, Polly, I turn it over to you. Would you like to introduce our other speakers around the globe?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to all our online viewers. We have with us Mary Holland, President of Children's Health Events, who is up next to speak. We also have live here on Zoom, Shabnam Khalisa Mohammed from the World Council for Health of CHD Africa. Dipali Oja is also here with us. Leslie Manukan is also here with us, and John Titus is also here with us. So we'll hear from each one individually. But first up, Mary Holland, President of Children's Health Events.
Holly, thank you so much, and thanks to our Solia Geography for putting together this distinguished panel to discuss this truly critical development in the world. It's a truism that all politics is local, but World Health Organization has turned this on its head, suggesting that all health is global, and yet this violates everything we know about politics and health. Individuals' actions are the most important factors in determining individual and community health. Local communities, national governments, and finally, international institutions should play roles in creating health policies. Protection of health and individual rights are best achieved at the local level. So WHO is turning global precedent and common sense on its head. I wholeheartedly support international global communication and cooperation. I do believe international institutions are vital in both politics and health, but this communication and cooperation must be on the basis of consent, not coercion. At the heart of the proposals that the World Health Assembly has been considering is removing consent from national governments and providing greater coercive tools to the World Health Organization. This is extremely dangerous. Even more dangerous from my perspective is that there is no proposed mechanism for accountability. All of us assembled here know how extremely challenging it is to hold national and regional governmental bodies accountable for the emergency health regulations we've experienced over the last 2 years. Many of us have been challenging the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, the European Medicines Agencies, the European Union, and we know just how difficult that is. The notion of suing international bodies located in Switzerland with vast protections would make it virtually impossible to achieve real accountability. How did we get here? The World Health Organization was created in 1948 with the promise of international cooperation. And I believe the World Health Organization has done some things well, particularly in the areas of research and education. However, its reputation is decidedly mixed. I refer people to the important documentary Trust Who, which details the WHO's regulatory capture by industries that the WHO allegedly regulates: big tobacco, big pharma, big tech. The WHO has become captured by big industry proxies, including their proxies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi and CEPI and the Wellcome Trust. The capture is absolutely real. And when it comes to vaccines, the WHO has a particularly bad reputation. Vaccines are global moneymakers, and WHO has helped its friends. The WHO's SAGE group, the Strategic Advisory Group experts on immunization, has been instrumental in the globalization of mandatory vaccines. And I don't believe SAGE has ever met a vaccine it didn't like. In 2009, the World Health Organization pushed swine flu vaccines that were made hastily, that terrorized people with the idea that millions would die. They were completely wrong, but many people suffered permanent injuries. The WHO has pushed human papillomavirus vaccines, despite the fact that they've never been proven to prevent a single case of cancer. The clinical trials were fatally flawed, and injuries have been, and deaths have been catastrophic and real. In fact, countries with high uptakes of human papillomavirus vaccine have increases in cervical cancer rates. The WHO has redefined vaccine and pandemic and public health emergency of international concern as it suits its industry masters, making a mockery of language and of the WHO's fitness to lead in international health. Children's Health Defense will be coming out with a documentary in just 2 weeks, Infertility, a Diabolical Agenda, showing the WHO's direct involvement in distributing infertility-causing vaccines in Africa, failing to give any informed consent, deceiving and abusing women. And I would note that under the Treaty of Rome, creating the International Criminal Court, forced sterilization is a war crime. In the COVID area, the WHO's response has been particularly bad. It encouraged travel from China when that had a direct impact on disease spread. It took the WHO 2 years to acknowledge that SARS-CoV-2 is airborne and that ventilation makes a difference. It knowingly suppressed early treatments such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine that could have saved thousands, if not millions of lives. It promoted separation of children and parents in quarantine in the name of disease prevention, something that has happened in China and that has prompted global horror at the sight of toddlers being separated from their loved ones. It endorsed virtually meaningless PCR tests under false premises. It's continued to promote shots that worldwide data suggest are doing vastly more harm than good, actually suppressing the innate immune system and increasing the likelihood that those jabs will develop COVID or other illnesses, potentially leading to disease, hospitalization, and death. Despite this appalling record, Director General Tedros and his backers would have us give the WHO virtually dictatorial powers over world governments, the right to declare pandemics whenever and wherever they please, with essentially no oversight or accountability, the ability to send in health SWAT teams anywhere in the world. For the record, I and this group are hardly xenophobes or extreme nationalists. On the contrary, we have assembled an international group understanding just how important it is to view global issues from varying perspectives. I deeply favor international communication and cooperation, but global institutions cannot endorse despotism, tyranny, unaccountability, and corruption. These are unacceptable at the national and international level. People of the world can and should reject any developments that facilitate power grabs by unaccountable leaders and institutions. So in that spirit, I happily pass the baton to my colleagues and look forward to learning more about these important developments in the last 10 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for all your contribution. And it is so important to have now a working group that works together, and today's meeting is our kickoff meeting from where on we take it as long as we need to bring this message to the people and also to bring accountability to WHO. Now, it is my task now to give you a brief overview on the changes that are now about to be made on the concrete level, and then the changes that we see at the horizon and what to expect from these changes. What made it to the headlines the most under the title of International Health Regulations was the United States proposal. The United States took a fast track by delivering their own proposals of amendment in January this year, which was only made public in as late as April to everybody. That came in the middle of a process that had been initiated exactly 1 year ago by setting up a working group that had to come forward with new proposals to amend the international health regulations. Apparently, that ordinary working streamline was not fast enough, and therefore, United States, the administration of Biden, they came up with their proposal. Luckily, from out of these 13 points of their proposal, the administration withdrew 12 points and joined a group of other countries that came with a counter-proposal just with respect to the rejection period, which is the Article 59, number 1 of the International Health Regulations. And this Article 59, para 1, does now provide a rejection period that so far for the countries to reject new amendments. So far is still 18 months to be reduced to 9 months. The United States proposal was 6 months. And then there is, before it goes into force, a period still up to now of 24 months that ought to be reduced to 12 months. This is all what remains from the American proposal in the form of a counter-proposal that was brought forward by a group of states, including the United States, but also Australia, European Union, Japan, Korea, United Kingdom, and so on. But what to expect if you look further into the future? What will happen? Well, the ordinary working group that works on the IGR, International Health Regulations, will continue their work. And they have published quite understandable into which direction they want to go. They have submitted their final draft on 23rd May, a week ago, and there you can read that there are 4 main areas of change based on a survey they had done. Interestingly, the survey they had done between December and January this year was only replied by 64 member states. And be aware, there are 194 member states. So talking about democracy, talking about engagement of the countries, if you base your new modifications on participation of just 64 member states, this is a very poor proof of democracy. And another poor proof of democracy, the principle of democracy, is that also non-member states were allowed to join this survey process. And we had altogether, we had 60% non-member states parties that joined this process and 40% member states. So this is in itself a no-go for an international organization that should actually represent the interests of the countries. Now, in addition to this final report we can read, I just mentioned, we have another paper that contains a lot of hints where WHO wants to lead us, and this is the paper, so-called paper on health emergency preparedness, response and resilience, published in this recent version of 4th of May. And we don't need to go into the details, but I can just tell you that all these proposals lead to the goal to extend the capacities and the competences and powers of the several branches of WHO in many different ways, including strengthening independent monitoring. There will be in place where countries will be monitored more strictly than they had before. And most of all, opposed to the situation as we have it today, all the measures and proposals will have a legally binding effect. So far today, the recommendations that are issued by the General Director have not a legally binding effect, and that is clearly the case. And still, we have seen in the past 2.5 years, still under the current system, the member states have treated these recommendations as if they were legally binding.
Recording in progress.
So, and then there are many more sources where we can draw the conclusion from that WHO is going to extend its powers into every direction. And it's doing so already since 2016. And the main directions actually should give rise to concern, to big concern, and I will tell you why. Number one, with respect to discovery, with respect to risk assessment, WHO is keen to establish a system of global total surveillance. It's WHO who will in the future define all legal, policy and technical capacities for surveillance on a 24/7 basis. And this is driven by the idea that every member state should be in the position to every time, any time, to monitor and also to deliver information to the WHO on its health status, health situation. Then more also concerning is the fact that it will be WHO to define what virus or subvirus actually will be defined as a threat. And they will put it on a list, and that list cannot be challenged, can not at all, as we have seen the past 2.5 years, put in question. If some constructed virus makes it on the list and it is somewhere discovered by some PCR test, we can be sure that will give rise to a public health emergency of international concern. And this is the next point. The Director General of WHO is vested with an unparalleled executive authority under the international health regulations in the future to declare and recommend emergency status, not only of international concern, but also of regional concern or just intermediary provisional health emergency status. And that would then, as we know, trigger our member states to, in our countries, to declare national emergency, so with national extra powers and national extra measures, putting our courts to the sidelines and putting our national parliaments, making them statistic figures. And all of that goes together with a facilitation of, as they call it, procurement and authorization. WHO is engaged actively in promoting and facilitating the delivery of vaccine substances and to make it as easy as possible for the producer to produce and ultimately to deliver these vaccines without proper control, whether these vaccines really serve the purpose and whether they would do more good than harm. And this leads me to the final point I make, and I see the slide is already on. We run all the risk that actually with accepting the changes that are in the pipeline, which have not been talked about yet, but they are in the pipeline, that we will be caught in a never-ending pandemic creation cycle that can be controlled by WHO only. And there will be no chance of any supervision, no revision, no revised assessment. From the point of a better surveillance, 24/7, to the definition of the disease, and then to the extension of the powers of the Director General to declare alerts in any way and to prolong it. And as you all know, we are still today under a status of public health emergency to the better delivery of the vaccines and to the enforcement also of lockdowns and so on. So that is frightening to me as a lawyer, because that will deactivate with one single declaration. To be clear here, if Tedros is whispering something like pandemic, with 1 second, he will shut down for as long he wants our constitutions, our democracies, our businesses, economies, and that will have a big impact, a negative impact also on public health. And so this is now why we are here together, and this is why we are called to action, and you can be sure we do it cross over the globe, over all the countries. Our duty will be, as we call ourselves, we gave the name International Alliance for Justice and Democracy, and our duty will be to first inform the public, that the public can start action and put some pressure on the political level. Then, in addition, a point must be that we insist in proper investigations, that really put under scrutiny was it really worth? Was it justified to call out pandemics on the international level? This reassessment, this re-evaluation also stretches to all countermeasures and to the principle of strict quality control. And there are many more things. You can be sure we will start, and as this is a big project, we can only do it together, and I'm very happy that we found each other and that we are a group of high qualified experts, and hereby this is a call to all my lawyers colleagues, to all my expert colleagues in the world. Please join us. Join our global alliance for justice and for democracy, and reach out to us so that we can work together. Thank you very much. Now.
All right, well, thank you. Next up, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Shabnam Palisa Mohammed, World Council for Health and Children's Health Defense Africa. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Polly, and thank you to our brilliant colleagues from around the world, legal and other experts taking the stand for health, for autonomy, and for sovereignty. So this part of my presentation will focus on conflicts of interest within the WHO architecture, as well as certain observations and analysis regulations, some of which have been adequately covered by my colleague, Philippe. Controversial proposed amendments to the IHR 2005, as well as a proposed new pandemic accord about which there's been really little to no actual public participation, both facilitated by the WHO, have led to robust discussions and debates about the centralization of health by the WHO, by the United Nations, and of course, by the World Economic Forum, and by extension, influential investors. Now, the secretive nature of these processes surrounding both the IHR and the new pandemic treaty strike at the very heart of democracy. Historical complaints about the lack of public participation within the WHO and the United Nations are not new. Several civil society organizations have in the past lodged complaints, but to no avail. The WHO and the United Nations are not built on democratic principles, but rather through monopoly, and more specifically, corporate monopoly. Indeed, it is through a civil society campaign that countries are now objecting to the WHO's infringement of personal autonomy and national sovereignty. I'd like us to first focus on conflicts of interest as it relates to mismanagement and corruption. A previous Director General of the WHO, Margaret Chan, admitted in a must-watch documentary called Trust Who that the WHO has no choice but to go around cap in hand for funding to run its operations. Yet, as India has discovered and reported at the current World Health Assembly number 75, there are several irregularities with the money being given to the WHO. Indeed, this is a serious matter deserving of an investigation by legal and financial experts. It is important to note that the WHO has an established history of maladministration, corruption, and conflicts of interest. What then is a conflict of interest? One of the legal definitions includes, it is a term used to describe the situation in which a public official or fiduciary who, contrary to the obligation and absolute duty to act for the benefit of the public or a designated individual, exploits the relationship for personal benefit, typically financial. We might have heard by now that the WEF and the WHO have announced a partnership towards a 2030 agenda. And certainly this organization and others will be keeping an eye on this partnership as we work towards creating alternative pathways for health, autonomy, and freedom. So let's talk about the types of conflicts of interest that exist. Number one, actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. Two, these conflicts of interest can be financial or non-financial. Three, they can be direct or indirect. 4, they may involve personal or professional relationships. 5, they are conflicts of role and duty. And 6, a predetermination on decision-making. Due to the influence of private money, in a Journal for Integrative Medicine, a WHO whistleblower review stated that the WHO is the biggest threat to the world's public health of our time. In assessing conflicts of interest, the question to be asked is, would a reasonable person think that a competing interest or conflict or appearance of conflict or a possible conflict with the duty to act in the best interests of the entity it has influence in and control over? Let us turn to now talk about some examples of conflicts of interest. Given the restrictions of time in this very important event, I'm going to highlight 8 of them very quickly. The WHO is predominantly funded by private stakeholders. These include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, and the Wellcome Trust. Those who have been studying conflicts of interest at an intense level may also realize that these organizations are intrinsically connected to BlackRock and Vanguard. Number 2, the WHO direct contributions to the WHO include Big Pharma via Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi Pasteur, Sinovac, the Serum Institute, and others. 3, the WHO's personal injury protection and in-kind contributions are also dominated by Big Pharma payments. 4, the WHO signed a long-term partnership agreement with the Wellcome Trust, whose major donors are Big Pharma and corporations such as JP Morgan Chase, all with major shareholdings in Big Pharma. 5, the WHO Global Vaccine Action Plan appointed a leadership committee consisting of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the NIAID, UNICEF, and of course, the WHO. All these entities have a direct investment in and are beneficiaries of the vaccine industry. 6, the WHO's funders and decision makers often include individuals who own patents in or interests in products, including vaccine products and vaccine technology. 7, there is a veil of secrecy around delegates at the World Health Assembly, and these delegates do not consult with the people of their country before voting on decisions that have considerable and significant impact on health, on autonomy, and on sovereignty. 8, the Director General of the WHO has been accused of people, including his homeland, Ethiopia, of the mismanagement of Ebola, the abuse of office, and the support of civil war. A complaint to that effect was submitted, but has seen no outcome. Let us now turn to talk about amendments to the IHR, given this context on conflicts of interest, mismanagement, and corruption. In January this year, the US Department of Health and Human Services submitted 13 amendments to the Director General on the International Health Regulations 2005. Again, due to a concerted and collaborative civil society campaign, 12 of the 13 amendments to the IHR were taken off the table at the World Health Assembly number 75. And certainly, this is an achievement that is worth celebrating. These 13 amendments included an article that would give the Director General Tedros, who has been re-elected, unilateral power to declare an actual or potential public health emergency of international concern, also giving affected or potentially affected or suspected to be affected countries a mere 48 hours to respond to an offer for assistance by the WHO. Let me pause at that point to mention that Bill Gates has been busy putting together what he calls GERM, which is a project including 3,000 hand-picked experts that would be deployed around the world in the instance of an actual or potential public health emergency of international concern. This project of 3,000 experts and the costs thereof are going to certainly impact on the national budgets of our health and our countries. Now, at the WHA, the World Health Assembly, which has just ended, one article remained on the table, and that being Article number 59. In other words, how long countries have to object or to provide a reservation to the IHR amendments in future. Currently, that stands at 12 months. Significantly, a group of countries have proposed draft resolutions which in effect need 4 months to be considered. We may argue that certainly 4 months is not nearly enough time to canvass the views and opinions of sovereign nations and indeed civil society. Ultimately, the working group on the IHR has now decided that the process will be finalized at 2024 at the 77th World Health Assembly. Of course, those of us who've been given a sharp eye on the WHO have realized that this date, 2024, converges with what the WHO anticipates to be the new pandemic treaty. In other words, the IHR amendments and the new pandemic treaty will be converging on the people of the world, unless, of course, the people of the world take a decision to resist and to co-create parallel health and autonomy systems. Now, colleagues, what will happen in this time is intense lobbying to convince World Health Assembly representatives to vote in favor of these amendments. World Health Assembly delegates should remember that the suggestion of sanctions against countries which do not comply with the IHR or the new pandemic treaty have already been raised by EU officials. And so certainly what we are seeing is the weaponization of health via the WHO as the tip of the spear. I would like to also highlight the duplication of process and costs. Certainly having both amendments to the IHR as well as a new pandemic treaty, and no doubt a multitude of papers, white papers, policy decisions, meetings, international travel, creates a duplication of process and costs. And so essentially, the WHO is an unending pit of resource wastage that is leaching funds from sovereign nations who would do better to invest those funds into their national health and wellness systems. Although the WHO has no lawful authority over sovereign nations, and ultimately what it does produce are recommendations and not binding decisions. Of course, and it most recently at a press briefing said that it does respect sovereignty and it is passionate about human rights. The fact remains, the WHO is the tip of the spear on the establishment of a one-size-fits-all globalist approach to health with digital passports and social credits already activated or in planning. This is not health. This is biosurveillance. It is what they call health security. And we need to pay close attention to the language that is being used to attempt to shape a very different type of world to what the 99% of us want. The call to action, colleagues, listeners, and viewers around the world is very clear. Stop the WHO and co-create a better way forward for health, autonomy, and sovereignty. I thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Shabnam. So now we're going to start a new little section here on regional updates, and we're going to start with the World Health Organization's role in Africa, and we're going to go back to Shabnam Palisa Mohammed to hear about that. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Polly, and of course to our colleagues. Let us turn to the role of the WHO in Africa. There is much to discuss, so I will make 8 very concise points. 1. The WHO stands accused of facilitating or legitimizing Pfizer experiments on African Nigerian children without proper informed consent, and this was in 1996. 11 of 200 children experimented on died, and their families, or some of them, only received compensation in 2009. 2. The WHO has never demanded accountability for the harm caused to people by big pharma products, including vaccines. 3, a 2019 inquiry based on emails to senior WHO management claimed systematic discrimination against African WHO staff members and that recruitment processes are corrupt. 4, whistleblowers also allege that money intended for the Ebola crisis in West Africa and the DRC was mismanaged by WHO staff. These claims are not independently investigated. In other words, the WHO investigates itself. The WHO's malaria study was reported in the BMJ to constitute a serious violation of international ethical standards due to a lack of informed consent of Ghanaian, Malawian, and Kenyan children. The GlaxoSmithKline vaccine Mosquirix caused 10 times the amount of cerebral malaria as opposed to unvaxxed people, and a doubling of deaths in young girls. 6, WHO whistleblowers who spoke out during the COVID-19 chapter were victimized by WHO staff, leading to international campaigns to support whistleblowers. 7, the WHO is supporting mRNA production facilities in Africa, knowing full well the issues with electricity supply crises in countries like South Africa, and simultaneously pushing for the establishment of the African Medicines Agency, which would serve only the interests of Big Pharma. And 8, like other UN organizations, the WHO is plagued by wasteful spending, disregard for transparency, incompetence, and a failure to adhere to basic democratic standards that respect and uphold the public interest. Of course, I will briefly highlight the WHO's role in South Africa during the COVID chapter. There has been, despite the fact that Africa has the lowest rates of COVID-19 infections and vaccinations, primarily because people relied on natural health practices and natural medicine, which the WHO has a role in trying to block. The WHO has still tried to force unsafe and ineffective experimental vaccine products on the people of South Africa and Africa in particular. Democracies have been subverted with lockdowns, often violent tactics used by the police and by the military. And of course, there's been a devastating impact on economy. In South Africa, for example, over 30% of unemployment is where this country is and is currently facing as part of a broader economic and socioeconomic crisis. In addition, over 70% of South African youth are currently unemployed. This would, of course, pave the way for loans from the IMF and the World Bank, holding Africa, South Africa, and perhaps the world hostage to a constant cycle of debt and corruption. I'd like to turn from there now to talk about some solutions which some of our colleagues may also speak to during the course of this press conference. Let's bear in mind Articles 2, 19, 20, 21, and 22 of the WHO Constitution, and the WHO's failure to respect and abide by its own legal standards on necessity, reasonableness, and proportionality in decision-making. Here are some of the solutions we are offering. Number 1, an international and independent investigation of the WHO's role in each of our countries, both historically and during the COVID-19 chapter, is essential in order for us to be able to move forward. This investigation should cover maladministration, conflicts of interest, and corruption. Where criminal acts, recklessness, or negligence are involved, diplomatic immunity must fall away. Second, as my colleague Dr. Astrid Stickelberger recently presented at the Better Way conference, there are 3 options in dealing with the IHR amendments, the new pandemic treaty or accord, and other tactics that may be used by the UN, WHO, and WEF machinery. And these are A, opposition, to object or to vote against amendments to legislation, or to make a reservation on part of the amendments which constitute a violation of individual rights and sovereignty. 2, representativity and self-determination of the people, using existing legislation within the United Nations infrastructure. Alternatively, a reliance on natural and common law, it is possible for the people of our world to make representations to the United Nations that enhance representativity and self-determination. And 3, the option that I and many others advocate for, a defund and exit of the WHO for the following reasons: mismanagement, conflict of interest, corruption, the costs of facilitating and managing these legal or illegal instruments, which will run into billions, and of course, the stifling of free speech and information led by the WHO. Other solutions are contained in the open letter regarding the new pandemic treaty and the IHR. I must pause to mention that this open letter by the World Council for Health, supported by Children's Health Defense and many other partners and allies around the world, reached 415 million people in 7 days. And indeed, it is a testimony to the power of the people. Some of these other actions that can be taken include raising awareness on the ground and online, campaigning through rallies, political mobilization, and legal action, collaborating as coalition, exploring activist toolboxes, my apologies, engaging global indigenous leadership, notifying World Health Assembly delegates to oppose amendments, and of course, activating people's parliaments, legislatures, or referendums to oppose these power grabs. In closing, certainly, the evidence of the failures of the WHO to provide clear and ethical guidance on masks, lockdowns, repurposed medicines, and experimental injections, as well as the clear impossibility of reform, mean that the only way to secure real health is to defund the WHO and exit the globalist machinery. I am of the belief that the proposed IHR amendments and the new pandemic accord have given the world a strong opportunity to do exactly that, to defund and exit, and to build a new and better pathway to health through ethical collaboration untainted by funding conflicts of interest. The call to action is clear: stop the WHO and co-create a better way for a better world. I thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam. Wow, sterling work there. So now we are going to hear about the World Health Organization legal battle in India. We have our truly brilliant attorney with us, Dipali Ojha from India. So over to you, Dipali.
Thank you, Polly. Hello, everyone. Greetings from India. I thank all my colleagues for your brilliant presentation. It's an honor to be here today. And as we discuss the IHR, its implications and dangers posed to our democracy, please allow me some time to share with you some significant updates from India, specifically regarding how we have successfully managed to assert our fundamental rights, which are guaranteed by Constitution of India. And we have tried to achieve this through legal actions in Indian courts. Let me start with the latest update. The highest court of India, the Supreme Court of India, has delivered a significant judgment, a landmark judgment on 2nd of May, 2022. And in this judgment, the Supreme Court has invalidated all the vaccine mandates, thereby upholding, number 1, bodily integrity, and number 2, the right to refuse vaccination as a fundamental right of every citizen. So even though there is a pandemic, a citizen has a right to refuse any medical treatment that includes vaccination. So in the said case, it is proved that the vaccinated ones cannot claim that they are fully protected, as they can also spread infection. And this judgment is significant as it is coming from our topmost court and is applicable to all 1.3 billion people of our country. And there are 2 more significant aspects to this judgment, which is 115-page judgment. Number 1, the court has directed the government to make registration of adverse events very easy and accessible to all people. Secondly, the court has mentioned very clearly that even in future, if there arises any instance or occasion where fundamental rights of citizens are interfered with, such restrictions, if imposed at all, would be subject to a constitutional review. So under no circumstances, any situation could be manufactured or engineered wherein the fundamental rights of citizens are curbed under garb of, say, some virus, some virulent virus, which is affecting people, and restrictions are imposed suddenly. Even though this is the case, such restrictions would be reviewed and would have to pass the test of constitutional review of the courts. Thirdly, the court has also asked the government to make the clinical trials data regarding children's vaccination, to publish it and to bring more transparency around the clinical trials data regarding the children's vaccination. The second update is about an ongoing case that we are working on currently, and this case is at the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court is the highest court in the state of Maharashtra. Now, this is a public interest litigation wherein we have not only challenged the vaccine mandates, which fortunately have been withdrawn completely, the vaccine mandates as well as the mask mandates from the state of Maharashtra from 2nd of April 2022 itself. But apart from this, wherein we had asked for withdrawal of mandates, we have asked for three more things. Number one, we have raised contentions around collection of fines from people who were caught not wearing the face masks, because the prevailing laws in the state and in country, there is no such provision where any authority or any official could go and collect fines from people. So now we have prayed the court to let the respondent file their reply, and if the court is not satisfied, the government has to return all the fines to the people which have been illegally collected. Secondly, the petitioner has asked for compensation for infringement of his fundamental rights, since the court in its previous order has clearly mentioned that the restrictions which were imposed during Corona, these restrictions had no sanction of law, and therefore fundamental rights of people have been violated. The petitioner has also sought criminal prosecution of all those officials who have been directly responsible for bringing in such mandates in the state. The next hearing in this case is in the month of July 2022, and the court has directed all the respondents in the case to file their respective replies well before the next date of hearing. The details of the case, including the copy of petition, the case number, and the previous orders, have been uploaded on our website, www.indianbarassociation.in. Now, the third update, which is very, very important, is about the vaccine murder cases which we have filed in High Courts of India. There are 3 such petitions, of which 2 have been filed in the High Court of Bombay and 1 has been filed in the High Court of Kerala. Now, in these 3 petitions, in addition to monetary compensation, which is sought by parents who have lost their kids after the first dose of Covishield vaccine. Covishield is also known by the name AstraZeneca outside India. Now, one of the petitioner, who is a father of a daughter who was a frontline warrior who took the first dose of Covishield vaccine, and she suffered very serious side effects, and within a month she passed away due to blood clotting in her brain. Now, this is one case, and another case is about a 23-year-old man who passed away within few hours of the Covishield vaccine, and he was forced to take the vaccine because he wanted to travel on the public transport system, to travel to his place of work. And to travel on the public transport system, there was a condition that a person has to be double jabbed. As a result, he went in for the vaccination, and within 3 hours he died. Now, in this case, the mother of this man who passed away, she has requested the court to have an investigation by Premier Investigation Agency of India, which is Central Bureau of Investigation, and wherein we would want all the parties to be investigated who have peddled the narrative that these vaccines are safe and these are the only solution, they are the only savior from getting corona infection. So these include Bill Gates, number 1. Second is Adar Poonawalla, who is the CEO of Serum Institute of India, who has partnered with Bill Gates for manufacturing of Covishield vaccine. And of course, there are officials, the secretaries of the state government, of the central government, and other health officials who are responsible for bringing in these mandates. Now, another point worth to be noted is that of these 3 petitions, in 2 of the cases, we have the adverse event report coming in from the National Committee, it's a government report, which clearly states that the reason for their death was the vaccine. There is a direct causal relationship between the death and the administration of Covishield vaccine. So what more proof do we need? These are vaccine murder cases. These are not simple deaths, but these are clearly murder due to vaccine. Now, as the news of these 3 petitions spread, I'm sure there would be more petitions which would get filed as people become aware and start questioning about the sudden deaths that they would have seen in their close families or amongst their friend circle. Now, I think we must continue to spread the news and spread the awareness around these experimental jabs and how the laws and established procedures have been thrown out of the window by the authorities in power and which went unquestioned by the mainstream media till date. There is a famous quote that says, "The world suffers a lot, not because of violence of bad people, but because of silence of good people. But we need not be disheartened anymore, as good people from everywhere across the world have started raising their voices and are registering their protests against the wrongdoings, illegalities, and irregularities in the conduct of those who are blatantly abusing their power to the detriment of humanity." I am very confident that we can definitely thwart the plans of those people who are power hungry and who want to seek control, a totalitarian control over the world, and who can go to any extent, even if it means harming human beings. So let us continue to work with the same vigor, with same patience and perseverance, and with the spirit of unity, and let us regain our sovereignty, peace, and harmony. Thank you so much.
For what you and all your colleagues are doing. So now we turn to 2 amazing attorneys who are making an enormous difference in both Austria and France. It's my pleasure to turn to Georg Prolich and Diana Prota. Diana, why don't we start with you? Tell us what's going on in France and Austria.
Well, thank you for this invitation and for letting me speak about what I do in France for my client. First of all, I want to start with it's not a funny story, but it's still an interesting story. Last March last year, so not this year, last year, I had a client who was an elderly man of 80 years old. And we were in France during the 3rd lockdown. So he asked the Supreme Court, why should he be still locked down since he received 2 jabs of vaccination? He was one of the first person in France to receive vaccination. And the answer of the Supreme Court was very surprising. The Supreme Court said to him, well, you have to stay locked down because the vaccine doesn't work. Really? And it went on all the newspaper, and this time on mainstream media in France. But even though this happens, people tend to forget. And this is how amazing it can be. On the 12th of July 2021, so 3 months after that, the French president, made the vaccination compulsory through a vaccine pass. So you will ask me, how is it possible to make compulsory something that doesn't work, even though the Supreme Court said it? So in my views, there is 2 answers on that. The first answer is because of the WHO, because all the laws we have in France regarding the pandemics is an implementation of the WHO legislation. So this is the first point. And the second point is the problem of the scientist expert. In France, when we were locked down, the French president appointed a scientific committee, as the WHO has a scientist committee. And we all wonder why, because we have lots of doctors and medical academy in France, but still the president appoints this committee of scientists. And this committee of scientists gives his view about about vaccine, about the lockdown, about everything. And we challenge his views, the views of this committee, in front of the Supreme Court. But the French Supreme Court said that we cannot challenge it. We cannot challenge this advice, scientists' advice, because, well, they are only advice and they are supposed to have no effect on the life of people. That is what the French Supreme Court said. But we all know this is not true. Everything has a very a tremendous impact on our life. And if you look at the WHO regulation, the Article 48 and 49 of the RSC, I don't know how to translate it, but it's a part of the treaty that exists right now and that will be changed. But the Article 48 and 49 states that the general director of the WHO to launch a pandemic or to stop the pandemic has to ask the advice of this emergency scientist committee. And until this scientist committee won't say the pandemic is over, it's going to be an endless pandemic. And if we have the same system as in France, well, we have the same. It's that we cannot challenge this expert advice. So this is how we end up with a total ubuesque, I would say in French, situation. And that leads also to the fact that people are compelled to take vaccine and they suffer side effects, because these are the two important points that I wish to talk about today. Since we cannot challenge the scientific effects, well, with the scientific advice, well, we are all suffering of side effects through this vaccination. Especially, I do represent in France two groups that have been challenging in the past in front of Supreme Court, but also that have been heard recently through the Senate committee in France, because the Senate launched an inquiry about side effects. So my clients were invited to speak, and the first of them is a group of pilot, steward, and hostess called the Freedom Flyers, French Freedom Flyers. But we have this initiative also everywhere in the world, in the US, in Canada, in Switzerland, in Australia. Well, lots of pilots and hostess and steward are gathering together to say that vaccination may cause side effects while flying. We brought to the French Senate committee testimony of pilot and hostess testifying that some of them suffered side effects of the vaccine while flying, and it caused a problem for landing. So what the pilot and the hostess and the steward says is, we don't need to put at risk the safety of all passengers. We can only do a test, not get the vaccine. Through a test, we will know if the disease can be spread into the flight. But with the vaccine, we know that the vaccine doesn't spread the disease. So the test is better for everyone. And with the test, you don't have side effects that might occur while flying. So this is a more serious approach. This is a practical approach. This is normal to see the best way to ensure safety. And I hope that the French Senate and also the European Court of Human Rights that has been receiving the claim of the pilot will answer and will think about this. And the second group I wish to talk about today, and especially after my London colleague Shadnan talked about that. Well, in France we have an initiative of women called Where is My Period? It's composed of 15,000 of women who are testifying about the fact that now, after getting the jab, well, they don't have their periods anymore, or maybe they are bleeding three times a month, which is totally abnormal. And all these women testified in front of the French Senate, and together with the hostess, because the hostess of the Freedom Flyers also suffers this kind of side effects. And one of them explained to the French Senate that she was so much bleeding after the jab from her uterus. Even the medication that that is usually given to women, which is called Exacil, didn't stop this bleeding. So in the end, she said to the Senate that she had to choose between a license, a flying license, which is her job, and her uterus. This was because she couldn't be able to fly without the vaccine, without the pass. So in the end, when you have children, when you have to pay to eat, well, it's compulsory for you to choose, and it's not normal to have to choose between a uterus and between your job. This kind of side effects is a real problem. We have initiative from women coming from Canada, coming from Australia, coming also from other countries. I think with what we heard, this is a real problem. And the French Senate said, in fact, that they are receiving also lots of alert from the women. And they said that the EMA, it's the European Medical Agency, it's like the CDC, but in Europe, that the EMA has been alerted by the women. But the EMA didn't look at it, shut it down, saying we don't know why women has this kind of problem. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's the stress of the lockdown. So I see people are smiling, but I think the stress is the cause of lots of things if we listen to the expert, because I'm also the lawyer of a little kid who lost his child 5 days after the vaccination. And for this kid, well, they also said to his family that maybe he was stressed. But now we have proof that it's really the vaccine who is responsible of his health state. But stress is not the reason why women have a problem with their period. And most of all, what is very shocking is when the vaccination started, the French Ministry of Health knew about this and said on French national TV, well, ladies, it's not a problem if you don't have your period for 1 month, it will come back next month. Well, we are 6 months, 8 months ahead, and it didn't come back. So this is a tremendous problem. And why are we keeping up with this vaccination? It's because we can challenge the expert advice, which are still saying that the benefits outpass the risk, which is, in my point of view, not true for the biggest part of the population. That is the children, the woman who wants to be pregnant, also the men, of course, young men, but maybe I'm not a doctor, but for sure, for the biggest part of the population, the risk is greater than the benefit. And the problem is, how will we find a way to challenge this expert advice? This is, I think, a question also that for my learning friend on that, but really, and I will maybe close it by French. What we say in French, for the one who speaks French, that l'expertise, c'est l'incompétence qui s'avoue déléguée à l'incompétence qui s'ignore. L'incompétence qui s'avoue, c'est celle de nos politiques qui prennent ce genre de décision, et l'incompétence qui s'ignore, c'est celle des experts. So maybe I will translate. Expertise is self-confessed ignorance, the one of our politics, delegating to unknowing ignorance, which is the one of some of experts that are still keeping on this vaccination. And I hope all together we will find a way to stop this with a legal decision, that because we need the justice to be restored in our country.
Thank you very much, dear Diane, for this very impressive country report from France. I find it very remarkable that the French Senate has allowed such presentation to happen and that you were part of it. Let me ask you one question. Did you have the impression that the senators were impressed? Did they show some reactions, or did they put up the face of total denial?
Well, for the biggest part, they show the face of denial, but they take into account the women's problem. 2 senators, women senators, said at the French Senate that Europe should reopen the case and look more into this problem. 2 of them were shocked, and I hope they said that this is a big problem, and they will keep on inquiring. So we are hoping for something through this committee. We're still crossing fingers, but I think this is a very big alert, and this is an alert for the women that we will see everywhere in the world.
Thank you very much, Diane Porta, and thank you very much to her for her great work she's doing in France. Fingers are crossed. Now, I turn over the microphone to my colleague from Austria, Dr. Georg Prochlik. Please, Georg. Go on.
Hi, I'm from Austria. Sorry, I don't speak French, so I have to give it in English. First of all, I have to start with some basic ideas which will enlighten the following decisions. I will come to more or less the same result as my female colleague here, but in another way. I normally use papers against their authors, showing what they said and how large the gap between this and the truth would be. First paper, on the 26th of October 2021, the World Health Organization presented the zero draft report of the members' working group on strengthening WHO preparedness for and response to health emergencies to the special session of the World Health Assembly. And in this paper, you will find as one important issue, as one important aim concerning the pandemic treaty, as we call it now, an opportunity to update and strengthen the leading and coordinating role of WHO in the global health architecture. That means more rights to the WHO. That means more sovereign state rights to the WHO, more competencies. And those competencies have been feared, or at least seen critically, by one of the few parliaments who really function as parliaments, who are real parliaments and not only some assemblies of discussion, the English one. The English Parliament raised a question to the European Commission concerning these ideas of the new treaty. And they said, the Commission was asked, to what extent will it ensure that the citizen who has no direct vote in a body such as the WHO is not bypassed in the decision-making process, and that a shift of competence further and further away from the voter does not lead to an increasing democratization of our society. This was not a question of a so-called, as we put it in Austria, a Schwurbler, man who doesn't believe in science and who doesn't understand it, but it's a question of the English Parliament. And the answer of the Commission was just the principle of informed opinion and active cooperation on the part of the public are the utmost importance, of the improvement of health of the people is anchored in the preamble of the Constitution of the World Health Organization. In the World Health Organization's Constitution, you can read highest importance, highest improvement of health. That's our aims. That's nothing seen from the point of the question. They asked, is there a danger to our democracy, to our position of our citizens, to the position of a citizen who is not able, who will not be able to vote, to take part in an election concerning WHO. And WHO just said, well, we are a serious institution. That's no answer. In many years, in many fields of profession, I have learned one sentence. One of the basic mistakes you can make in your life is to trust a guy you cannot control and counteract. WHO cannot be controlled by the people, and therefore people would be unwise to trust WHO just because they have some phrases in their constitution. Therefore, each transfer of basic competencies of the state to WHO is contra-democratic. It cannot be seen in a different way. If you ask what is the basis of WHO, WHO is one of the most important hindrances, impediments on the way to sell what you want to sell as a pharma firm. Yes, they check the medicines, they check all the medical issues, they give a permission, they give a recommendation, etc. So they might stop or might help a firm to get the products on the market. And now a quick look at the development of profits in the field of vaccines. In case you look at the firm's balance sheets in the field of vaccine, the firms of pharma in the field of vaccines, you will see pharma firms up to 2019 did not really gain profits in the field of vaccines. The development of vaccines was very expensive and very time-consuming due to certain checks and tests you had to do. Starting from 2020, middle of 2020, the balance sheets have altered. Vaccines are a real cash cow now. Vaccines based on mRNA can be produced cheaply. And in a situation in which WHO says, well, we need vaccines, don't waste time with testing. Bring them to the user. In this time, it's really cheap to produce and to sell vaccines, and you can make tremendous profit from it. Look at the charts of the firms. Look at the development of the profits. And I cannot share the view of Shabnam, who said there would be corruption within this play, or there would be a conflict of interest. To my opinion, there's no conflict of interest. On the one hand, you have a couple of firms ready to pay money to get the allowance to sell the products. On the other hand, you might have a couple of public health clerks ready to take the money offered by the firms. That's a complete match of interests and not a conflict. Now to Austria. In Austria, you find a reflection of those problems in the decisions of the authorities, of the courts, and of the Austrian Constitutional Court. For example, the Austrian chambers of medical doctors, the Ärztekammern, those are specialized authorities for medical doctors, which are the controllers of their work. They can grant a permission to work as a doctor, and they can recall this permission in certain cases, under certain circumstances. And so, in the last year, many procedures in Austria have been started at the 9 chambers of medical doctors, saying, we want to recall your approbation, your permission to work as a doctor, due to the fact that, for example, you wrote an article saying that vaccines would be ineffective or they would be dangerous. That's a crime, because you have shaken the minds of all those guys who might have taken those vaccines. They say, no. This doctor wrote in his articles, vaccines might be dangerous, so we do not want to get waxed. This is a crime. Some authors in Austria say this is a crime close to murder, because you killed the man by hindering him taking vaccination, and so by getting infected, and so by dying by COVID-19. And those doctors, of course, said, well, that's nonsense. I have just mentioned my opinion. And that's the connection to the WHO. The authorities said, no, there is no freedom of opinion. In the case, there is a state-of-the-art result of science. There is a state-of-the-art result of science concerning vaccines, and so you are not allowed to mention your opinion. Another case was a doctor had written a testimony. A doctor had written a testimony for a patient who wasn't able to use filtering face P type 2 or FFP2 mask. And this doctor was confronted with the recall of his appropriation due to the fact that he endangered the public due to the fact that he said this man does not need to wear a mask. He took the risk that this man would infect the whole society. That's close to murder. And so we have to recall the doctor's permission. And in some cases, our Court of Constitution have helped us in the past, not now. We went to the Court of Constitution saying, for example, those regulations are breaches of the Constitution because they have no legal basis. Such a regulation may be made by the Minister of Health in case of emergency. We present to the court 50, for example, 50 testimonies, 50 papers of important scientists saying there is no such situation. The Constitutional Court decided, well, we are not ready to check the scientific basis of a regulation. In the papers of our laws is written, the Minister of Health has to look at an expert's ideas, at an expert's results, and then to make his regulation. We have only to check whether the minister had looked at the expert's paper. We have not to check whether the results of the so-called expert are correct or not. So we do not read your papers of your scientists, of your experts. We say it's enough that we have seen that the minister had read one paper. And a second decision of the court said, we had mentioned there was a regulation concerning the lockdown, and we said there was no reason for lockdown. And the court said, well, there was a paper written by the Commission, by the Austrian Commission on COVID problems, and this paper only scientists, not lawyers. This paper said there would be danger. And the fact that the minister had based his regulation on this very single paper was enough to match the Constitution. The Constitution does not force us to check, to prove whether the scientific ideas in this paper are right or wrong. When WHO says there is a pandemic, then our ministers are entitled to use all the instruments concerning pandemics without checking whether there is a pandemic or not. That means we have a transfer of power to people who are not elected, who are not legitimated democratically, who are no lawyers, who are no judges, whose decisions cannot be checked, whose decisions cannot be recalled. And that means the end of the democratic play. And therefore, we have to stop such developments as the development concerning the pandemic treaty. Pandemic treaty would mean we have a couple of guys we do not know personally, we do not know anything about the funding, but they formulate political and legal decisions. So we have to stop them. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Georg, for your country report from Austria. Thank you very much. That's,
well, now everybody, we have, it's our greatest honor to introduce you to Leslie Mnookin, who is president and founder of the Health Freedom Defense Fund USA. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Holly, thank you. And thank you to everybody else who is here and who is fighting the good fight to defend our freedoms, our liberties, our national sovereignty, and everything that we hold dear, because this is truly a fight for humanity. What is at stake? What is at stake is literally the future of humanity. President Ronald Reagan, whether you think he was a good man or a bad man, said that one of his biggest fears was that over time, a controlling authoritarian socialist state would be introduced and foisted upon the world under the guise of health. It's very clear that when any leader in the world obtains too much power, it's almost impossible for the people to push back against that. We know from history that when industries obtain too much power, they then prey on an unwitting public. In the United States, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act was signed into law in 1986. And since that law was introduced, which provided protection from any liability, financial or legal, for the vaccine makers, the vaccine schedule in the United States has tripled. We must pay attention to history in order to understand our future, right? We know that we repeat it if we don't. We know that when government leaders and industries obtain too much power, it is used against us. And that is what is happening now. The World Health Organization, under the guise of public health management, wants to usurp power from each and every one of our nations and from each and every one of us by implication. This is why I started the World Freedom Declaration, but I want to make it very clear to everybody who's watching and listening that this World Freedom Declaration, which you can find at worldfreedomdeclaration.org, please sign it. It was a collaboration amongst all of the people on this call and dozens of organizations. Children's Health Defense, my group, Health Freedom Defense Fund, the Solari.com or Solari Incorporated, Stand for Health Freedom, the World Council for Health, Doctors for COVID Ethics, and many other groups.
over 4 organizations signed on as signatories, with hundreds more. I think it's about 500 more organizations signing on as well. And then we've had nearly 75,000 signatures. But we urge every citizen of the world to go to worldfreedomdeclaration.org and sign on. And the reason for that is simple. The World Health Organization and all those who represent us at the World Health Organization need to know that we are watching, and that even though they may not be directly accountable, we will hold them accountable. It is imperative that every citizen of the world sign this, because if we get millions of signatures, we can take it to our honest public servants and ask them in each of our nations to stand with us in defense of our health freedoms and our rights, to stand with us in defense of our national sovereignty. It is a tool not just to get names, but to garner publicity and attention from those who serve us. It is very clear that in the last couple of years, those who pretend to serve us do not serve us, but another master. But it is through this kind of international collaboration with all of these groups and millions of global citizens that we can come together and use our collective voice to pressure those in power to do our bidding, not the bidding of special interests or out of control groups like the World Health Organization. Everyone needs to understand that although many of the amendments proposed have been tabled, they are not gone. The pandemic treaty will come back. It's still being considered and negotiated. And there are all sorts of mechanisms in these treaties and the International Health Regulation proposed amendments, which would accord extraordinary power to the World Health Organization, such that they would have a compliance committee, which would be responsible for enforcing what happens in your nation. Let's be clear. If these things go through, the World Health Organization is an unelected, unaccountable body. It will have blanket authority to define a pandemic, to assess when one is happening, to enter your country, to tell you that there is something happening, and then to insist and direct how the response is conducted. Individual nations, individual regions will not have a say. The documentation used to say explicitly that the World Health Organization would confer together with the individual nation in question, but that language has been stricken from the documents. So I don't want to belabor this point, and I don't want to reiterate what so many have said, but this is a threat to your bodily sovereignty. It is a threat to every citizen on the planet. If you want some unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat who cannot be sued and is not financially or legally liable for anything they do to direct your life, then go ahead, go back to sleep. If, however, you want to stand together with us in defense of these ideals, which I hold dear, and I know billions of people around the hold dear, then please sign worldfreedomdeclaration.org and stand with everyone on this call and all of us who are opposing the tyranny that is being attempted on each and every one of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Extremely important call to action there. Thank you so much for all the work you do. Right, we're going to go straight over to John Titus, American attorney, on positioning the World Health Organization in the larger landscape. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Polly. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Good afternoon, Europe. Good morning, United States. Again, as Polly said, my name is John Titus. I am a federal litigator here in the U.S. I've been doing that for 25 years. For the last 7 years, I have had a YouTube channel, now also a BitChute and an Odyssey channel called Best Evidence, that talks about a lot of the topics that we are talking about here today, including sovereignty, the rule of law, corruption, and transparency. My channel, however, focuses also on another issue, namely financial and monetary issues, which I want to touch on here briefly today for reasons that will become clear. All of the topics that we are talking about, they're becoming increasingly important as private companies move into and take over spaces, public spaces that are traditionally reserved to the democratic process, like health, and they do so the private companies move into these spaces under two different guises. It's really a 1-2 punch, as we've seen and we've heard about today. The first sort of gambit is there's a crisis, the most recent example being a pandemic. There's an emergency that justifies the suspension of the normal democratic process of transparent deliberation. The pitch is there's a panic, we need to act fast, and we need to act now. And number two, the second part of the 1-2 punch is because we need to act quickly, and because it's so important in the face of this crisis, we can't leave decisions to ordinary lay people and citizens in the democratic process. We need to turn the decision-making process over to experts and let these so-called experts decide. That, in a nutshell, is the premise of the WHO's new draft international health regulations. It's really suspend democracy and let global experts decide what's going to happen. And I want to take a couple of minutes to explain where this comes from. It's very important. It is not an accident. This feint really is not original to the to the WHO. It's actually a page from someone else's playbook. And you need to understand whose playbook it is, who those people are, and why they are so very dangerous. It is no accident that the new international health regulations are coming from and were proposed by the Biden administration, the U.S. executive branch, because it is the U.S. executive branch that is where the 1-2 expert punch, where that move started. And it started in the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. In the wake of that crisis, the economy was very fragile. And as crimes of Wall Street began to come to light, crimes that really had drove the crisis, as people looked at what created the crisis, a lot of crimes by Wall Street started to come to light, particularly in the mortgage-backed security space. But yet, despite the crimes coming to light, the executive branch was refusing to prosecute Wall Street no matter what the circumstances were. And people like myself are like, well, what's going on? You have the Department of Justice, which is in the executive branch. It never prosecuted Wall Street banks. It never prosecuted Wall Street bankers. No, it would only prosecute small-time chiselers, the home flippers or the small-time hedge funders, way far away from Wall Street. And finally, what happened toward the end of Obama's first term is that UBS, which will be near and dear to Swiss attorneys, UBS, which is also a major Wall Street bank, it's a primary dealer. It deals with both the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury. It's a very important Wall Street player. UBS admitted to conducting or perpetrating wire fraud in connection with rigging LIBOR. And yet still, despite its confession, like Bernie Madoff, nobody went to jail. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, refused to prosecute. And I want to play you a clip from the DOJ itself so you can hear their words. It's not my words. And you can see what they're saying about why the UBS was not prosecuted in that case. And I want to just highlight a couple people here real quick. This guy is Lanny Brewer. He is the Assistant Attorney General in the DOJ. He is flanked by Eric Holder right here. Eric Holder is the Attorney General. That is a cabinet position. He answers directly to President Obama. And they're talking about UBS Securities, as I mentioned. And Lanny Brewer has just explained why UBS is not going to be prosecuted, why nobody is going to go to jail. What they do not tell the people there in the press corps, these two guys, is they are both from a law firm called Covington and Burling, which actually represents all of Wall Street, including UBS. They don't mention that. And that's an important thing, because I want you to listen. Eric Holder is going to step in here and rescue Lanny Brewer, who's just been annihilated by the press corps about why they're not prosecuting. Listen to what Holder says about why UBS gets off the hook.
Those factors that are with regard to the impact. Let's be honest. Yeah, I mean that's a factor, and I'm not talking about just this case, but in others that we have resolved. The impact on the stability of the financial markets around the world is something that we take into consideration. We reach out to experts outside of the Justice Department to talk about what are the consequences of actions that we might take.
Okay, you got that? So we reach out to experts. And the experts tell us, oh, no, you can't follow the law. That would upset the stock market. The market is still very fragile. The economy is fragile. In other words, it's just like here, we have an emergency. So the next question is, who are the experts? And I want to play you another clip from one of the same guys there, Lanny Brewer. It's the only clip you will ever see where anybody in the Department of Justice actually reveals who the experts are. The guy who's going to speak here is Lanny Brewer. You just saw him. He's the Assistant Attorney General. Listen to what he says about why the DOJ or who the people are in the collateral consequences. He reveals who they are in this clip here. He is talking to the New York City Bar Association. Listen to what he says.
We are frequently on the receiving end of presentations from defense counsel, CEOs.
Oh, sorry about that. Here we go.
We are frequently on the receiving end of presentations from defense counsel, CEOs, and economists who argue that the collateral consequences of an indictment would be devastating, just devastating for their client, and that even global markets will feel the effects.
So in other words, in the wake of the crisis, the economy is fragile, and the crimes that Wall Street commits, they're not being prosecuted because experts are coming into the DOJ. And when Lanny Brewer just reveals there, it's actually the CEOs and economists from the very law firms that are being prosecuted. And so that's the reality. It was defense counsel, CEOs, and economists. And so he was saying, well, the global market's going to feel the effects. So the DOJ, the end result is never prosecuted Wall Street, despite the fact that they're confessing to crimes like Bernie Madoff did. To be clear, the decision to ignore U.S. law and not to indict Wall Street came from Wall Street itself. And it came disguised, just like here, as experts advising the U.S. executive branch on what to do in an emergency, the emergency there being a fragile economy, which is exactly what you have with the WHO experts rendering advice that benefits private parties funding the WHO. The WHO website actually admits, if you look at it, that the second largest donor to the WHO is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm just going to cut to a graphic. From there, you can see Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is second in the list of donors to the WHO, $751 million, and that is only in 2020 and 2021. That's a lot of money that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is donated, and I want to highlight the fact that Bill Gates is on record talking about how he personally profited from vaccines. So I want to cut to this clip and just listen to what Bill Gates tells CNBC here.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. And it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return.
I think the numbers that you ran through were if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah.
Okay, so Bill Gates has put $750 million into WHO in the last 2 years, and he's put $10 billion total into vaccines. Query what role the WHO plays in Bill Gates achieving a 2,000% return on his investment. Well, for one thing, the WHO conceals all facts that do not promote the advantages of vaccines. It is basically an advertising agency for vaccines. Take a look at what the WHO says on its website about the Pfizer vaccine. It is quite interesting and revealing what the WHO's website, their own website, says about Pfizer's vaccine, and we'll pay attention to what they're not saying as this as well. Here is their website, and you can see what they say. The Pfizer COVID-19 mRNA vaccine is safe and effective. Now let's look at what they are not telling you, and you can see Pfizer right down here in the bottom. Now I want to look at what they're not telling you. This is from the VAERS website. It's the CDC. It talks about the dangers of vaccine, and you find just by a search on the CDC's own website that there are 28,312 cases where the vaccine was COVID-19, of which Pfizer is obviously a big player, and the patient died. So the vaccine that has killed 28,000 people is deemed safe and effective by the WHO. Now, the other thing that the WHO is not telling you about Pfizer is that Pfizer is a criminal enterprise that has been caught in criminal fraud before. This is from the DOJ's own website. Pfizer to pay a $2.3 billion fine for fraudulent marketing. Okay, they're pleading guilty to a felony violation for misbranding their drugs and misleading people about their drugs. They're paying the largest criminal fine ever imposed by the United States for any matter. Pfizer is, the WHO doesn't seem, they don't deem it worthy to mention to you that Pfizer is guilty of fraud in misrepresenting the safety and the efficacy of their medicines. So the conclusion here is that the U.S. executive branch has worked for private corporations and banks since the global financial crisis. Its MO is to replace the democratic process and the rule of law by replacing it with a rule by private corporations and banks in particular are on top. It does so, the executive branch, by using emergency and crises to justify all manner of undemocratic regulations. It cites the authority of so-called experts who stand to gain financially and professionally. Bill Gates gaining financially, Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer, their law firm, gaining professionally by advancing their company's interest in the name of the public good and to the detriment of the public. And that's a real problem. Wall Street, I'm going to tell you right now, got away with these crimes because Wall Street possesses one thing that the big pharmaceutical companies do not. And this is what you need to pay attention to. The pharmaceutical companies don't really have any sovereign powers. Wall Street banks did. They have the power of money creation. They can threaten the government with, we'll shut down your money supply. You're going to have tanks in the street. You're going to have Armageddon. Those threats actually were leveled in the lead up to the bailout of 2008. Big Pharma does not have that kind of leverage. So you have a chance to get out of the WHO. You can opt out, urge your government officials to opt out, sign petitions, fight the WHO tooth and nail. And that's what we all need to do. I thank you for your time and attention.
Now, we already have to come to an end. We have consumed a bit more time than we had planned, and we have to wrap up our meeting. Now, I will start with it, because what we have heard right now, if we sum it up, this is a call for action. We are all called to action, in particular we as the lawyers. It is our job to protect people's rights. It is our job to protect people's health, people's democracy, and in particular, overall, it's our job to protect the rule of law, because that's basically the basis for our peaceful existence as society. And therefore, I must also reach out to those lawyers who are not yet engaged into this fight and defense for democracy and for people's right. Please contact us. Now, rightfully and very well put out by Leslie Minukian. Thank you so much for putting out this initiative, Leslie. I repeat her initiative, worldfreedomdeclaration.org. This is so correct, pointed out. We have faced to deal with unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats who make decisions over the destiny of our future in the next decades to come. And we are not prepared to lose all our rights. We are not prepared to lose all our sovereignty at all. So therefore, this was the kickoff meeting today in official terms. We are constituted as a free alliance for international alliance for justice and democracy. We are open to, of course, many more participants. We want to work together, and I guess the direction we will have to go is we have to engage in direct contact with those who are responsible. I repeat, we have to engage in direct contact with WHO, with responsible people, and we have to engage in direct contact as well with the political responsibles in our countries, and to confront them with information and with demands, because as Leslie also said, we will have to hold them accountable on several issues. And so I guess we will have to define first and preliminarily the important questions they owe us the answers for, whether it is in the field of financial contributions, financial participations, controlling the WHO, including the contracts and together with drug producers, with financial actors, and then we have to come up with clear demands, most of all starting with the reminder of universal standards of quality control to subject to an independent assessment the quality timing of the WHO's recommendations, in particular with respect to PCR, in particular with respect to the so-called vaccines, and so on. Furthermore, we have certainly a good deal to do to inform the public with their rights they have, and to give them out also information what they can do, with what kind of letters. Again, a very good example, this declaration that was put forward by Leslie Manookian. And then also, as lawyers, we will certainly have to continue on our country level and pursue our legal actions to address the wrong and criminal test. I cannot call it differently. It is the basis, this testing, for all this evil. And we know that this test, and it is established that this test cannot be taken as a proof for disease. And the other big area is actually to address, as Diane Prota does it, and many of us do it as well, so intensely, to address the illegal and not helpful and even harmful mRNA substances. This will also then derive or lead to public attention. We will be able to produce our legal actions to the public and to share it with the media, and therefore to create some pressure. Ultimately, and there I share the view of Shabnam, my colleague in South Africa, yes, we need to push the case that politicians, if they don't, if the politicians don't really pursue the interests of their own people that are defined by our own constitutions, we will certainly have to push for their own demission, for their own rejection. And this is certainly something we have to think about, because we don't can afford having politicians serving as the puppets of big pharma and other corporations. So we have a lot to do, and I want to stretch the fact that we are just at the beginning. This is just the beginning, you know, and we are on the beginning of this path. And I look forward, dear colleagues, in the United States, in India, in South Africa, and here also in Europe, to work together with you, and I hope we will have many more other lawyers who will join us and be helpful with us. Thank you very much, and I turn over now to you, Catherine.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you to everyone. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for coming. If we have questions or press requests, please feel free to send them to iaud.press@protonmail.com. That's iaud.press@protonmail.com.
Is it UD or JD?
Is it JD? Sorry, IAJD, forgive me. IAJD.press@protonmail.com. Does everybody have that? Okay, and we were hoping to have a question and answer, but the Geneva Press Club has been very generous to come and let us open up, and we promised we'd be through by 5. So send your questions. We want to answer them. We want to address them. I do want to thank the Geneva Press Club. Just a round of applause, because they really did a great job. I want to thank the organizers, and I want to thank the support of Mary Holland and Children Health Defense and Polly Tommy, who runs CHD TV. It was wonderful to gather everybody, and it's a holiday weekend in the United States, so they had to get up early on a holiday weekend, and we appreciate it. And again, thank you to all the speakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, at last, I want to thank our inspiration who gathered and brought us all together. Philip, thank you for all of your efforts. They're extraordinary. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. Thank you. So therewith, thank you very much to all for coming to Geneva. Thank you for your attention, for your support, and thank you to all the viewers and to all the listeners for taking up this short notice press conference, for listening to us, and you can be sure you will hear very soon from us again. All the very best, and have a very nice weekend to everybody. Thank you.